Morning, everybody. Happy 15th day in the Tory Advent calendar of party shame. And welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's senior political correspondent, Rachel Wearmouth. Morning, Rachel.
Morning.
Now, this is the People's Paper Review. Get into the comments. Ask us whatever's burning a hole in your head. The best ones do win a news agenda mug. So get in touch. So what have we got today? Well, the Mirror couldn't decide what to splash on, so has gone with two stories. The tragic case of Star Hobson, beaten to death at the age of just 16 months. But above the fold, which is one of the more prestigious places in the print news journalism, is the picture that's gone viral overnight of a Tory Christmas party that apparently didn't happen. But it did involve jumpers, party hats, a billionaire, and some shocking Christmas braces. Now, inside, on pages 6 and 7, you can see more of that pic in all its terrible glory, including a hot and cold buffet that someone agreed to cater for, despite the fact that London was in Tier 2 restrictions at the time. Now, Rachel, this is our colleague Pippa Creera's great get, the nation's biggest party pooper, who was with us on Monday. Now, take us through it. What were they doing wrong? What was Tier 2 supposed to be doing at this time?
Well, Tier 2 crucially banned household mixing, and as you can see, there are some 24 people in this picture getting together, partying. The guidance banned, Christmas parties, and this is very, very clearly a Christmas party, as it would suggest, as you say, by the party hats and everyone apparently having a whale of a time. So the fallout from this included the resignation of who was at the time, had been the Tories' candidate for London Mayor. He's resigned from his job on a crime panel in the London Assembly after getting the call from Pippa Creera this week.
Hello, Sean. It's Pippa from the Mirror.
Yeah, the feeling of dread that must. So yeah, it's just more proof of just what was going on behind closed doors when we were all locked down, basically. Yeah.
So what's interesting to me about this, ask your questions, everybody, see what you'll find most interesting about this photograph. Maybe it's the Christmas jumpers, who knows? Or the absolute youth of most of the people in there who must have felt invulnerable to a bunch of things, including COVID. But the fact that Sean Bailey knew this party happened when it happened. He knew that London was in Tier 2 restrictions at the time. He was a mayoral hopeful. He was fully aware of what the rules were and shouldn't be, and was talking about crime all the time to other people. And the Conservative Party, because this was at Conservative HQ, they knew about it as well, because they disciplined 4 staffers for apparently, we've heard reports, haven't we, about smashing doors and drunken shenanigans and general misbehaviour after Mr. Bailey and the billionaire both went to say they went home early. So he knew about all this at the time, but he only resigned last night when Pippa gave him the call and said, we got a picture of it. And he also knew last week or so when we started reporting there had been such a party. So he's not resigned as soon as he realised how bad his involvement was. He's resigned only when there was a photograph of it, which is not best.
When you've got
there, where's his £10,000 fine?
Indeed, and there'll be more pressure, I think, on the Met Police after this to just sort of,
can't say there's no evidence, can they?
They can't say there's no evidence, no. And as you say, yeah, he only actually took action when gave up one of his jobs after we fronted him up on it, and in between that time he spent a lot of time on Twitter lecturing people about how they should follow the rules and how he, as a member of the London Assembly, was expected to do so, and then this comes out.
Yeah, it's like their back to basics thing in the 90s, because you could guarantee as soon as in those days, and I was still at school, I'm younger than I look. Those days, you could guarantee if a Tory politician came out and started talking about family values, that he'd be caught with a plastic bag over his head, and some kind of strange sex drug in his mouth within a couple of weeks, or with a love child or something. And this seems to be their thing, that as soon as the Tories talk about crime and keeping to the rules and other people breaking the rules, that eventually it's going to get found out that they're all there with it as well. Joe says it's so wrong, all those who couldn't see their family and that died during this time, so wrong. It's easy to take the mick out of this picture, isn't it, Rachel? And last night I was saying the Tory staffers, they're so young and they feel invincible to things and that the rules don't apply to them, and they're stupid enough to commit a crime and then pose for a photograph while doing it. But as Joe says there, it's the fact that at the same time this was going on, other people were not holding a loved one's hand for some reason.
Yeah, there are so many tragic stories from exactly this date last year, and I think there's a reason why people are very angry about this, and it's because of everything they had to go through to get through last Christmas, the sacrifices they made, and it's another way that they see sort of people connected to the government just seeming to just have a laugh behind closed doors. Yeah,
and I think as well, perhaps it feeds into the anti-vaxxers' claim of plandemics and scamdemics and how this isn't as serious as we are being told it is, because they think, well, if the government aren't taking it seriously, that's because they know there's nothing here. There's nothing to worry about. It is just a cold. This is an attempt to control the population and all their mad conspiracy theories. And so therefore we don't need the vaccine. Therefore we don't need to wear masks. We don't need to obey any restrictions. That's the central part of all this. It's not just the fact they've had a party and it looks bad and it feels bad if you've lost someone. It's also the fact, I think, that they've had a party and it undermines everything a government has to do during a health crisis.
Yeah, and we had an exclusive poll, didn't we, last week, just saying that 77% of people were minded to not follow the restrictions if they saw people in power completely ignoring them and being found to have broken the rules. But there was a Professor Stephen Reicher was on, gave evidence to the APPG on COVID yesterday, and he said, the Prime Minister's behaviour at the Christmas party, at the Christmas quiz rather, and in following everything that happened with Dominic Cummings, he said it looks, from a behavioural scientist point of view, it looks like a warrant for rule breaking. But he did say that the public, the sort of the flip side of that was that the public were continuing to follow the rules, because when they're asked to do something to save the NHS or to protect the people that they love, they still do the responsible thing, the vast majority. So even though they'll find this incredibly frustrating, he felt that a majority still would follow the rules.
Yeah, that's because most people are much more sensible than your average Tory staffer, I should think. Now, keep asking us your questions, everybody. What do you think about this party? What do you think about the choice of Christmas jumpers? Brown, I would consider that a bit of a bad idea. Were you, what was the date for this party? This was one at CCHQ. I can't remember. This was November.
December 14th.
December the 14th. What were you doing on December the 14th last year? Were you seeing loved ones? Were you kept away from your loved ones? Let us know. Now, Holly says, that's the problem. If it's that serious, then why are the rule makers not following the rules? I mean, they're clearly just stupid, but it's giving the conspiracy theorists a whale of a time. Is there an argument, though, Rachel, for saying, from a behavioural science point of view, maybe I'm just being a bit contrary here, okay, hear me out. Is there an argument for saying that if the government is caught doing this kind of thing, it actually makes the public more cautious because they go, oh, that's so stupid, and the message gets across better? Or we see Boris Johnson and his friends doing this and we think, well, they're morons. We've got to look after ourselves because they're not looking after us. They're not following the rules. Infections are going mad because of idiots like this. Could it help some way?
Well, I guess we're about to find out in some ways, aren't we? Because we had this sort of message to the public on Monday night from the Prime Minister, and I haven't seen major stories of people breaking the rules so far. So I think when people are asked to do something to save the NHS, they generally do listen. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a behavioural scientist, so I don't know if there is.
Maybe I'm just being.
I don't know.
I'm just too much of an optimist. I'm just hoping that there's something good we can take out of this. Who knows? Now, at the bottom, underneath Pippa's story, is a second humdinger from the man who's been billed as the most dangerous man in the lobby, our colleague Mikey Smith. This time, it's details of the Prime Minister's Christmas Zoom quiz that was against the rules, and in which he was breaking the rules quite clearly by being with two other people at the same time for non-work purposes, although he says he wasn't. And according to Mikey, this party took a week of planning. He's got the WhatsApp messages, which they involved instructions to leave via the back door in Downing Street, where, of course, no one would have seen them and there wouldn't have been any media outside. And quiz team names that must have taken, go at the back, it says, some effort to come up with these quiz team names, Rachel, because some of them are pretty good. I mean, the standout winners to me are Cheeses of Nazareth and Professor Quiz Witty.
I like Professor Quiz Witty. I'm slightly worried about beaver fever.
Yeah,
there's Books Quiz, which is a classic. Next slide, please. I think actually some of the quiz names are some of the most damning things about the piece, because it kind of feeds into the whole their whole.
Well, one of them is we've been clear, which is, you know, that is one of the phrases which the Prime Minister and his people have used again and again and again to enforce the rules on other people. But we've been very clear about this. You must do X, Y, and Z. We've been clear. We've been clear. We've been clear. And it's repeated in order to make them sound competent.
Right, and it just sounds like they're sniggering behind people's backs. It's kind of, you know, hands. Another one of them is hands, face, first place. You know, it's kind of, you know, and you get the whole thing that people need a break after a year of very hard work. But I think the planning that's gone into it, and, you know, this sort of element of, you know, these are all, you know, it's all funny that we had to do all of these COVID press conferences, and then being told to leave by the back door so that they don't get caught. It's kind of, it just shows how they may have been operating here. And I think people will absolutely, when they digest this story and the detail of it, I think they'll really become even more angry than they are at the moment.
As we just had a comment there, which is gone now before I made a mental note of the person's name, I'm afraid. But as she's saying, this comes, you know, it's a countrywide rebellion that's coming now. is there any concern, this all-party parliamentary group that was listening to behavioural scientists yesterday, is there any concern about mass civil disobedience of the rules as we come up to Christmas when they are almost inevitably going to get tightened?
Gosh, no. It was it mainly examined just how worrying the figures about Omicron are. Yeah, it was. I mean, that was just the one element of it from Professor Riker. He was kind of saying this doesn't help when it comes to obedience. But when he concluded his comments, it was more that he thought that the upside of it was that people would continue to obey restrictions. But they'll be angry with the government, I think. And when it comes to another issue, another bill going through Parliament, I mean, the policing bill and how it cracks down on protests, for example. I think when it comes to other things like that, if Boris Johnson tries to exercise his authority, I think he's in a position now where he's less able to do that, I think, because of how he and others around him have conducted themselves.
Yeah, Kellyanne says as well, the country's going to rebel against everything they say, get them fined and fired. It would be lovely if the Metropolitan Police were able to find some evidence, wouldn't it? If only there was a newspaper and TV channels and other newspapers and news outlets constantly providing evidence for the Met to see, which last time I checked with Pippa on Monday, they still hadn't rung her up and asked to see themselves.
But we had a look at just how many fines people had been given during coronavirus, and there was like almost 75,000 people were fined, and some fined, some people, like a student who had a New Year's Eve party while his parents were away, got fined 10 grand, like the absolute highest possible, and if this is kind of someone 19, 20 years old, that's going to put them in debt for half of their 20s if he had to pay eventually the full amount of that fine. So I think if they try to introduce really stringent fines for people, there'll be people who are just not, who'll be saying, if number 10 and if some government ministers don't face any consequences after what is clearly rule breaking, I think they'll have a hard time slapping some people with big fines.
Yeah. Now, Douglas says, no matter what the public do or don't do, the NHS is doomed under this government, while laughing at us openly. We've got a good story about the NHS later on, so stay tuned, Douglas. It's not all bad news, I promise you. But keep asking us your questions. What were you doing December the 14th last year while the Tories were having a party involving Christmas braces, Christmas jumpers, hot and cold food, and Christmas party hats with a billionaire? What do you think about the rules that have been going to be imposed on us? Are you going to be following them, or are you going to be rebelling? And speaking of rebellions, last night, the government suffered what appears to be the worst defeat in history, the worst rebellion for a government in history, apart from the only one that was worse was the rebellion that Theresa May had on her Brexit withdrawal agreement, I think it was, wasn't it, Rachel?
I believe so, yes.
That was 118 MPs voted against that from her own party, including Mr. Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
This time they've had 99 Tory MPs, far more than the Prime Minister's majority, voting against the government on Plan B and other curbs that have come in, other safety measures. And the government basically was carried through that by the Labour Party, which seems a bit more noble about these things than the Conservatives, no matter how you feel about it. But speaking of rebellions last night, Rachel, I mean, I don't know exactly how many of them 99 voted previously for voters to show identity papers every time they go to the ballot box. But last night, a huge number of them were voting against anybody having to show a COVID lateral flow test, which isn't an identity paper, for something as unimportant as going to the pub. So take us through it. What happened and why?
So this is the parliamentary vote on Plan B, which is to deal with Omicron, and as we've kind of both suggested, it sounds like there might be tighter restrictions to come. So these rebellions might in fact grow. But you had, and it was interesting that the rebellion, these 99 MPs who gave Boris Johnson a bloody nose, they came from all wings of the party. So it was kind of, your One Nation Tory lot, your 2019ers, your old guard Brexiteers. It was kind of everybody lining up to give Boris Johnson a bit of a kick in last night. And he did get, interestingly, Theresa May abstained. So she may have maybe an element of schadenfreude from the former PM, who was kind of lost her job partly because of Boris Johnson.
Almost entirely because of Boris Johnson.
Almost entirely because of Boris Johnson, yeah. And so he did get the measures through, but because he has a majority of 80 and the rebellion was bigger than 80, he got them through on opposition votes, and because of Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, basically, which is quite symbolic for a government, because it kind of shows that they don't have it if it comes to other COVID measures, that he might not have the, and he might, however, depending on how they judge it in future, but he might not have the ability to get it through Parliament and to do the job that he needs to do, protecting the public. So, and Labour came out straight on the attack last night and said, he's too weak to discharge the basic functions of government, Keir Starmer said, which is, and he was out there straight away getting his clip onto the getting it out there in time for the 10 o'clock news.
Doing the opposite of what Jeremy Corbyn would do, which was do it sometime next Monday, and then wonder
just
why no one noticed.
Never finished the allotments.
Yeah, exactly. I need my day in lieu kind of thing. Now, Laura says, what are the new rules that are being brought out? Help us with this a little bit, Rachel. But as far as I'm aware, last night the vote was for the Plan B proposals, which include wearing masks in public places again, COVID vaccine passports for things like nightclubs, and some changes to whether or not you have to isolate after you've been in contact with someone. That's been replaced with having lateral flow tests instead every day. You don't need to isolate. Is that right? Anything else?
Correct. Yeah, no, that's correct. That covers pretty much everything, I think, yeah.
Oh, good Lord, blimey, crikey. That's the first time I've managed to know more than someone from the politics beat on this show. Well, happy Christmas, me. It's worth pointing out, the Sun's reporting today a very unpleasant fact, which is that if anyone from now on gets COVID, you will be isolating at Christmas. Because if you've had COVID, you do still need to, if you have COVID, you have a positive test, you do still need to self-isolate. If, of course, you can find a test. But you have to self-isolate for 10 days, which would mean from today, if you get COVID, you are supposed to be on your Todd on Christmas Day and away from your families. If you get COVID or test positive when you happen to be at, say, for example, a family member's house for Christmas, you have to stay in that house for 10 days. So you have to isolate within their house, shut yourself away, but be there for 10 days. You're not allowed to go back to your own house to isolate. Now, Derek says, why doesn't the compulsive liar, Boris, do the decent thing and resign? It's absolutely disgusting the way this government have behaved with their double standards. I think that the one word in your question there, which answered it really, was the word decent. I'm afraid that's what we don't have. If you took that word out, you know why, kind of thing. I keep asking us your questions. What do you think about this rebellion from the Tory backbenches? They seem to be, Rachel, going against what the general public think, because all the surveys and polls show that most of us are fine with masks. Most of us are fine with having to show a vaccination status or a lateral flow test before we go to a big venue. Why are the Tories getting their knickers in a twist about something that most people are fine with?
Well, I think some of it, this is the principle of it. They don't like restrictions generally. I think some of it is because pubs may be fined if they're found to not be, and nightclubs, for example, might be fined for not using the COVID passes system, and they just don't like the idea of that. They think it'll be bad for hospitality, and I think their arguments last night were that there are a lot of young people who are having to put up with all of these restrictions, and that was bad for their mental health.
I don't believe that, because all the Tory MPs don't really qualify as young people who are going out clubbing. Possibly Michael Gove, but everybody, they're all pretty much to a man, middle-aged, older, the kind of people that are not going to be making shapes anytime.
I think that's right. But I think, which, a cynic may suggest that I think they just wanted to give Boris Johnson a bit of a bloody nose on this occasion because, they've had weeks of chaos, basically. So it's been, for everything from the Tory sleaze scandal and how he handled the Owen Paterson vote. I think they're just very, very frustrated and kind of want to get him to book his ideas up, basically. And they have a very difficult rest of the week in the, they've got this by-election in North Shropshire on Thursday. Not Owen Paterson, who, breached lobbying rules numerous times and eventually had to resign after they tried to rip up the rule book to keep him in place, basically. He had something like a 20,000 plus majority. And I'm told by the Tories that it's very close on the ground. They could edge it, but they could also lose it to the Lib Dems. So I think regardless of what happens in that seat, regardless of whether he hangs on to it or just hangs on to it by the skin of his teeth, if their majority, a 22,000 majority, I think it is cut down to such a level, I think you'll have a lot of Conservative MPs in traditional seats that they've held for a long time, because North Shropshire's never been anything other than a Conservative seat.
They'll be very worried about their own seats, won't they? Now, David has just asked us about the vaccine passport, and Joe here says the same thing. There is no actual passport, right? You don't get a little book from the government that you can stamp and you're allowed to go in and out of places, or you get a visa to go to the pub. Joe says the vaccine passport's rubbish. You fly abroad, but it's been taken away. It's been taken away. I don't know what you said, Joe. You can fly abroad, but he was basically talking about how you can still get it. You can still pass it on. There you go. And you still have to isolate. Can someone explain the logic of having it? I'll give it a go, Joe, right? So if you've had, what you have to do is show your vaccination status. So the little cards you get when you have your injection, or if you don't have the vaccine for whatever reason, you can show a clear lateral flow test, right? You take a picture of your QR code and stuff so that you can just confirm you don't have COVID at that moment. That is it. There's no passport. There's no passport control. You just have to show that if you're asked. And there's going to be a lot of people who are going to go to the pub and the pub's not going to check. So it's not the end of the world at all, despite the fact people are saying this is an imposition on your freedom. And the reason that you do it is because if you are vaccinated and if you are clear, you are much, 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 much less likely to have COVID, pass COVID on, or have to isolate. Okay, you don't have to self-isolate at all if you've been vaccinated. So there is a huge benefit to having the vaccination and to having some proof of the vaccination or your disease-free status in order to carry on our lives and keep the economy ticking over, which is what I thought the Tories were big on. Now, Joe says these flow tests could be anybody's. It may not be that person's flow test. These flow tests are fake. My friend did one for 5 days. It was negative. She was poorly to the PCR and it was positive. How does that work? This is a problem, isn't it, Rachel? We're dealing with tests that are a bit patchy. I've always had clear lateral flow tests. Don't know how much faith I'm supposed to have in them. Some of them are a bit dodgy. Some people don't do them right and you get a bad result. And then they say, anyway, the PCR is the gold standard and that's the one to do. But that, of course, costs a bit more money. So,
yeah, it's a big problem, not least because we're likely to run out of testing facilities. Well, a lot of people are having problems getting hold of certain tests now. And, again, the APPG on COVID yesterday, one of their top experts was saying that, we could expect the testing system to fall down given the scale of Omicron cases we're likely to see. But it's worth flagging at this point as well that Sajid Javid signalled in the Commons yesterday that double jabbed status in terms of the pass in the app was likely to change to triple jabbed once the booster program had been in place for, I think he termed it as a reasonable amount of time. I don't know what a reasonable amount of time actually would be, but it's kind of like he's signalling as strongly as he can that people need to get out there and get their boosters. Yeah,
it's been running since September and slowly as well. Now, Andy says, do you need to test if you're vaccinated? Yes, you are still supposed to test if you show symptoms or have a contact, if you think that you may have come into contact with somebody who's got COVID. Because as we've said, the vaccination doesn't stop you getting the illness, what it does is it protects you massively against dying from it. It protects you hugely from going to hospital with it. And it means that you are less likely to have any severe symptoms yourself, or long COVID, which is a massive issue for 1 to 2 million people in Britain at the moment who are suffering from that, mostly because they got it when they're unvaccinated. So yes, you still need to test if you're vaccinated. But if you have COVID when you're vaccinated, the chances are it will be no more than a cold. So get your jab. However, despite all this Tory self-indulgence and crappery, because can we say that? Crapery, if it's French, crappery about parties and masks and rebelling about things that people are fine with, there is some good news in the world. It's about the NHS, and here it is. Now, this story will make you feel better about the day. In October last year, a little girl called Hope Kedziorski, who wasn't even 1 at the time, was diagnosed with a very rare type of blood cancer. Worse still, she was too young to even start treatment. It took 6 months before she was old enough to go through, and I'm sorry, this is horrible even to list it, bone marrow operations, chemotherapy, blood transfusions, and over the summer she developed sepsis. Now, though, she has finally been declared clear of cancer, and she rang the bell. There she is. Ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling. She rang the bell at the end of her treatment. She's gone home with her parents. She's still only 23 months old. She's also got Down syndrome, and she's had just a mind-blowingly tough start to life, as have her parents. Good Lord, imagine how they must be feeling. But doesn't this just prove, Rachel, that despite all the pressures of the pandemic and the strains and stresses of COVID on everybody, especially the NHS, the doctors and nurses and the medics there and the staff, they're still doing amazing things. This entire time of the pandemic, they've been saving Hope's life and so many others like her.
Yeah, Hope's mum, Kirsty, she says, the whole summer was terrifying, but Hope continued to amaze us. We spent every day by her side in the hospital. The scariest moments was when she had sepsis, and then they came through it. And it's a wonderful, uplifting story for Christmas. And some of the pictures that we have of Hope in the paper are just lovely. Her sitting next to her Christmas tree, being able to go home. It's been lovely.
That's wonderful, isn't it? Absolutely aptly named little girl. And just wonderful story. And I hope that Hope has a long and productive life, and that all the people who helped save her, which of course aren't just the medics, it's the backroom staff, the technicians, the electricians, the plumbers, the clerics, the receptionists, everybody, clerics, clerks, receptionists, everybody else who works in the NHS there will have helped Hope and her family during the last year of agony that they've been through. Can rest assured that they've done something wonderful there, and thank you on behalf of us, I think, even though we don't know Hope. I think that's pretty amazing. Now, I don't know if we have any more questions to round up with, but I will let you know that while we're waiting to see if we've got any, next week we are going to have a special Christmas quiz on the agenda. Next Wednesday, comedian Mark Steele is going to be here. We're going to have some really good team names. And we're going to be asking some festive questions for you, but in a COVID-safe environment, everybody. So
following the rules.
Following the rules. Make sure that you don't miss it, and also that you're not sort of mixing in households at the time, because that's probably going to be unwise. Now, Belfast Boy says, how long is long COVID and how long does it last? Oh, my word. What a question. I did a story about a friend of mine, Anthony Lovelace, and his partner, Claire Hooper. If you Google it or look at my feed on Facebook, Susie Fleet Street Fox Boniface, you will find that story. Ant is a former war correspondent, a very healthy chap. Claire is a health worker. They came down with COVID before they could get vaccinated, before they were eligible in January. And they are now both registered blue badge disabled, walking with AIDS, facing bankruptcy, don't know how they're paying the mortgage, and their lives have been absolutely turned upside down. They've got it very bad. But long COVID can be when you have symptoms for more than 4 weeks. And in Ant and Claire's case, sort of post-COVID syndrome, as it's called, is when you have stuff for more than 12 weeks after the initial infection, and which can't be explained by anything else. So Aunt and Claire's sort of immune systems have just been ravaged. They don't work anymore. And they've got long-term problems they have to deal with, including with their sort of automatic body systems in terms of their blood pressure and things like that, and blood flow and heart rate. Kira says Belfast nightclubs were refusing entry at lateral flow tests, only accepting COVID passports. This is the thing, isn't it? This is what you were saying, Rachel. There are people who are going to be doing more than the government suggests because they think that's the safest thing to do. And Nicola Sturgeon has said, we're not going to issue guidance on social mixing around Christmas, but I'm going to ask you nicely to be sensible. Now, what's the chances? There's some rumours today that Boris Johnson might have to do the same. There's no way he could get a law about that through now with his Tory rebels. All he's got in his back pocket is to come out and ask us, please, to be well behaved and sensible. Is that going to happen?
Well, yeah. So there's a lot of signals that we might get fresh guidance for after Christmas, and sort of tougher guidance when it comes to January. When the NHS is facing the height of its winter crisis. So yeah, we might get new guidance restricting certain levels of household mixing, but that remains to be seen. We haven't had anything confirmed just yet.
No, we'll have to wait and see. Now, I think this is the last question. Eric, why has no one listened to Johnson's closest advisor, Dominic Cummings? This is a case of people thinking sour grapes, but I'm sorry, he's made some very serious accusations. They need to be taken very seriously. You're quite right, Eric. And Cressida Dick, if you're watching, it's been suggested that perhaps you might want to speak to Dominic Cummings because he knows stuff. He could be a witness. He could know someone who knows a witness, and that's how police usually investigate crimes and find the evidence of things. Failing that, of course, you could just open the Mirror and read that because we've done it all for you. Thank you for joining us, Rachel. Thank you for watching, everybody. And do come back next Monday, for another edition of the News Agenda. And don't forget, Wednesday, our COVID-safe Christmas quiz. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
See ya.